Hi, I'm Sean Morgan. I'm going to show you how to publish to ArcGIS Server using ArcGIS Pro. This is the same process that you might have used using ArcMap in past, in that the server that we're publishing to is a standalone one. It is not one that is federated against a portal or ArcGIS enterprise-based deployment. It is installed all by itself. So in past you had to do this using ArcMap, but with ArcMap going away, now you need to use ArcGIS Pro. So to get started, you create your map and you author it the way you'd like, and I've done that here. I've created this just using a very basic layer that I want to publish and put into my ArcGIS server. Now this layer is coming from a shapefile, and you can see that right here. That shapefile itself is stored in this folder. And that's going to be important when we register the data, because if you do not register the data with the server on the local server, any file-based database will copy at the publication step. And that could be really challenging if you have a large data set. So I'm going to show that registration as well. So we need to know where the data are locally, and then we need to put it on the server somewhere as well. So I'll get to that point once when we get to that point, I'll show you how to do that. So let's get started. First thing I'd like to do is just check to make sure I have the correct URLs. So I use a web browser, and I just go and navigate to check that my ArcGIS server is where I think it is. So bring up a web browser, doesn't matter which one, and then type the URL for your server. And it should come up. Now in this case, I can see my REST services directory, and you'd see this fine if you have your REST services directory available, in that it's not hidden, and it would work for pretty much any default install of ArcGIS Server. But this might be passing through a web adapter, which would prevent administration. So let's just check that administration is possible. We need that administration rights to be able to actually publish. So we can do that by just changing this portion of the URL to manager. And if we get a message like this, where administrative access is disabled, that means this URL is not valid to publish to this service. That is the URL, if we go back here, that is the URL you'd use in other services, but not one you use to manage the ArcGIS server. You want to separate the management from the use. So you don't want people that are publicly accessing this to get into your management. You don't want them to have access to anything. So that's what the web adapter is preventing. So to make this work, what we need to do is use the special administrative port. So you have to change this to 6443. And let's see if that opens up now. Now it's going to give me a warning first of all, because the certificate that is being used by ArcGIS Server directly is a self-signed one. And that's the default and the recommended practice by Esri. So this error message is valid. So what I do, I simply say advanced, and then I can say proceed. And now I can actually see the same thing. Yes, it has the not secured and HTTPS, but I know it is functioning. And if we now go to manager, you can see it's, oops, it'll actually, yeah, there it is. Okay. It brings up the management interface. So now I know this is the URL I'd like to use to actually publish to it. And you can always check your certificate if you want. You can check to make the certificate. You can see it's issued to the server name in this case, and that server name obviously is not matching the URL here, which is why there's an error with this mismatch. Okay, so that's an okay error in this case. So this is the URL we're going to need. We don't need the manager portion. This portion right here inside of ArcGIS Pro. So let's go to ArcGIS Pro and connect to this now. So in ArcGIS Pro, if we go to Insert, there's connections right here. Now you can do this, it'll show up in the catalog pane if you already have it once it's done, but I don't have any servers listed here, so I need to go and add that server. And you can see there's this new ArcGIS server in the connection. So if I click on that, it asks me for a URL. Well, now if I paste the URL we just tested, it's going to be happy. Now it's going to be sort of happy because it's going to see that it has a certificate that's invalid in a moment, and it will prompt you for that. So you need to log in with a user that can access this. So I'm going to log in with my site admin, which is the default again, if I remember the password. And you have two options. You can save it as part of a Windows Credential Manager, which is a little bit more protected and it's local on this computer, or you can save it in the connection file, and therefore it would actually be saved into the project itself in ArcGIS Pro. And this one isn't always good because it moves with the file if you copy it from one place to another, whereas this one stays on the computer locally. That's associated with your login to this computer. But I'm going to use this one. If I say OK, you can see it warns you about saving those credentials. I'm OK with it in this case. And then you can see it actually goes and connects. So if your server, I've already connected to this in the past, if your server prompts about the SSL certificate being invalid, you would want to accept it. And that's simply because it was read back in the services back here. That red item right here is why. Um, it's prompting you. And again, we're okay with that. We understand that this certificate is invalid because it's self-signed. Okay, so I have that created here. It creates the connection, and we can make sure it's working by dropping this down. You can actually see the services that are published. This is basically a duplication of the services directory inside of that server. Okay, we know we're connected, and we can also see what rights are available to us if we right-click on top of this. And you'll notice that there is a publish option. And that's because this URL that we've supplied has administrative rights to publish. So what we're going to do is publish a map service. And we're going to be selecting the map that we want. And you can see under maps, it says map, and that's basically just the name of your map here. That's where it's getting it. And you can rename this. Map isn't a very good generic name for a map service, so I'm going to call it the Canada demo. Well, I have to do this first. Then I can rename it. My apologies. I could have renamed this to make that, but now it's going through the sharing options. Okay, so here's where I want to call it the Canada demo. That'll be the service name that's going to get created in ArcGIS Server. You can supply a summary, and the summary allows you to detail about this map service. And just like ArcGIS Online, ArcGIS Server has the concept of tags, and we'll just do a demo tag. Now this is where things get really important. You have data, and you can reference the registered data or you can copy all of the data. And this gives you a little bit of information about each. Basically, if you reference the data won't be copied, but you have to have a version of the same data on the server itself. And that's what we're going to do. We're not going to use this copy option because if we do that copy option, it'll actually, even if we want to update this map service, it'll have to copy the data again. So we're going to do it as a manual process. So we're going to say reference the registered data. Next, the location that we're publishing it to. And you can see we're using the 6443 special administrative port. Again, never share this port on any application. You only use this to publish, stop, start, and manage services. You would use it without that 6443 when you're using it in an application. Okay, so do we want to put this in a folder? No, so we will not create a folder. Then what we can do is click the Analyze button. And the Analyze button existed in ArcMap, and you can see it pops up some errors. So this is the Analyze step, and you can see there are a couple of different problems. First and foremost, the layers data source is not registered on the server. So we're going to fix this one. The next one is the layers data source has a different projection, and a layers data source is not supported. And that's simply the base map. You can't publish a base map. The base map is already coming from an online environment, so it will remove that when it does publish. So let's fix this first one. That's the most important one to fix at this point. When fixing these errors, I always start at the top and move down. And that usually helps solve things because sometimes that top error might actually fix errors below. Now, before adding this layer to ArcGIS Pro, I created a zipped version of it. So I basically took all of the shapefiles and then sent to a compressed zip folder. And you can see that file's right here. I didn't want to use these lock files. I didn't want them part of this. So this file I'm going to put on my server and then deploy it in a location that is similar or the same that is being used on my ArcGIS Pro here. So I'm using an EC2 on AWS. So there's actually a couple of really cool tricks to be able to do this. So this is the EC2 that I'm using. And what I'm going to do is put the file on the local desktop. And you can do that really easily. So if I just minimize this for a second, if I just copy this file using the File Explorer and then bring up the remote desktop, watch this. You can just go paste. And that copies the zip file over the remote desktop session. So now I have it locally on the computer. So that's an easy way to get data onto a remote desktop. And that's what we need at this point. We need to put this data in that server itself. So here are the data, and what we're going to do is we're going to place this into a folder on the local computer. So I'm going to put this into the same folder that I was using on the ArcGIS Pro, which was, in this case, GIS Workspace off the root, and then a Canada folder. And I'll copy the document there. Okay, so that extracted the file. So now the path here is C:/GIS Workspace/Canada on my remote server. On the local computer, you can see it's C:/GIS Workspace/Canada. So the data are in the same location. Now sometimes case does matter, so it's important to distinguish that. But now I know the data are there. The second thing I want to do is make sure that the server has access to use this data, because this directory might not be usable by the server, so you have to set permissions to make that work. And you can do that under security here, and all you do really is just go to users, and we're just going to make it that all users can see this data for now. So under users, I'm just going to allow users to have modify rights. Okay, so I did that on the root directory GIS Workspace. So now any user of this computer can access this, and that includes the process that's running ArcGIS Server, because it needs to have access to it. So it has read and write access to this folder. Okay, so with that being set, now we can actually go through and register the data, because the data are there and waiting. And the interface here allows us to do that. You can see there's this little 3 ellipses at the end of the error, or in this case warning rather, and we can actually say register data source with server. So you can actually register it, and you can name this, and you can see the published folder path is the same as what's coming from the ArcGIS Pro connection. And then the server folder path, there's 2 options. It can be the same as the publisher folder path, which is the case that I have, or you can enter the name that you'd like, whatever that name needs to be. So in this case, they're the same. If they were not the same, make sure you type in the path. I don't know why it has a browse here. That doesn't make sense, because obviously ArcGIS Pro in this case is running on one computer and ArcGIS Server is on a completely separate computer. That browse would only be valid if you were running ArcGIS Pro on the same computer as the server itself. Okay, so we're going to have it as the same folder, and then we're going to click Create. And what that's going to do is register the data store on the server. And with it registered, the dialog goes away. You can see it now has a checkbox. So it's effectively done the analyze already for us. If we go back and analyze again, you'll see that it's dropped that item off. Now only the other 2 options exist. They're not warnings. They're warnings. Warnings do not prevent us from publishing. Only errors prevent us from publishing. So we could still use these things to fix these things. So layers data source is a different projection. So what do you want to do? Um, set the layer, different projections. You can set the layer so for projection wise, but this layer data source is not valid, and you can see its only option is, in this case, well, it's to remove the layer. So let's do that. So there's two items here. Each one of these are not valid. That's what it's really saying. So topographic map, and then this one, if I hover over it, you'll see it's world hillshade. So we'll remove this, and we'll remove this once it's happy. Okay, so now we have just our map. So let's just go do and analyze again. And now we should have no warnings or errors. And that's simply because the data are sitting in there by itself. Great. So what we're going to do is publish this data. And when we publish it, now it's going to go and create the service on the server, check the data connections, make sure the data are actually able to read the data set, and we'll have our data set published to the server in this map service with the cartography we have defined in this ArcGIS Pro session. So it usually takes about a minute to do this. Now, if it had to copy the data, it would have copied it first. Obviously, we copied the data manually and set things up and registered the folder, so we didn't need to do that. And there we go. It's published on the server. And you can see it actually even provides a link that we can use to actually access this service. And it gives us the URL to open that. And there it is. So this is the service on the server itself. And if we get rid of the 443, that is the URL we should be using on external services. So this is the URL that we'd use when we're using this with any computer, any application, something in ArcGIS Online, whatever it is. This is the one we'd want to use. We don't want to use the one with 6443 in it. And there you go. You now have your data sitting on ArcGIS server. It's functioning. You can see our map looks exactly the same. We can zoom in and out. And there we go. So that explains how to publish and register data on ArcGIS Server using ArcGIS Pro.